US Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has pledged to release details about his health. That's after his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton was diagnosed with pneumonia.
Well, let's get some more on the ceasefire which began tonight in Syria and which is so far holding. Joining me now is Baroness Cox, who's founder of the Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust. She has just returned from Syria, where she was part of a delegation of members of the House of Lords. Welcome to you. How important is it, do you think, that this ceasefire holds?
It's absolutely crucial. We were invited to Syria by leaders of the different faith communities, the Muslims and the Christians. We had a chance to meet local people. We had a week there. We went to Aleppo, one of the centres of conflict. The suffering is horrendous, and the ceasefire, I hope, will give an opportunity to bring desperately needed humanitarian aid.
The issue, or one of the issues, appears to be the future of the Assad government. Do you feel that Assad must go?
No, I think everyone we met, in areas like Aleppo, the leadership, the local people in the communities in Damascus and Latakia, wherever we went, the internally displaced people who've suffered so much from the war, everyone we met does not want regime change imposed by the West. They say, we're Syrian people, we want to have our own freedom to determine our own future. And there is a lot of support for some of the things that President Assad is trying to do, like reconciliation initiatives. So they do not want regime change.
Well, that slightly begs the question what they're fighting for then, doesn't it?
Well, they're fighting
against the Assad regime, a lot of people are.
A lot of people are, but many who were have now moved over and are actually supporting. And we met two ministers in opposition who were formerly very much against President Assad. Now one is a Minister for Reconciliation, who's undertaking very important work. So they say Syrian people have a right to choose their own leadership, their own future.
But this is a man whose forces have used sarin gas, who are still using chlorine gas, and as a humanitarian, you feel it would be OK in these circumstances for him to stay on?
Well, no one can condone some of the terrible things that happen in war, but they're happening on both sides. We saw massive gas canisters used by the rebels firing into Aleppo, which are filled with nails, cluster bombs. They use chemical weapons. No one can condone chemical weapons, but it's not one-sided. And while we were there were reports of the president's army using chemical weapons. There was no report on that very day, one day alone, when there were 4 attacks on civilians, horrendous. One was a suicide bomber at a checkpoint. Imagine a bomb going up to a checkpoint with cars of civilians, people burning alive. That wasn't mentioned. When we were in Aleppo, there were 4 missile attacks on the university. That's a civilian target. It's a two-sided situation. War is terrible. Bad things happen on both sides. But we have to reckon they're both sides. And I think one of the concerns expressed to us again and again in Syria from the local people we met right across the spectrum was they feel a lot of the media reporting has been very one-sided.
But you see, another problem is that neither the official Syrian army nor Assad's allies, such as the Russians, appear to have really concentrated on what we regard as the main menace, which is the Islamist al-Nusra and indeed IS.
I think that's been their main focus. They're fighting against those terrorist, what you really call them. I mean, they're extremist Islamist terrorists.
But I mean, it's proven that a lot of the Russian hits have not been on those forces. They've been on the other forces, the forces fighting Assad.
Well, war is war, but we spoke to the people. We come back to be a voice for the people. And I'd urge anyone to go and ask the people who've suffered their first-hand experiences.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, you were... I mean, the Syrian government knew you were there. You were effectively the guest of the Syrian government.
We went independently. We met President Assad, and you've got to meet in order to raise concerns, to raise your criticisms. So we did meet him, but that was 2 hours out of 5 days, when we spent the rest of the time with the local people. And so we met internally displaced people who fled the horrors being perpetrated by the Islamist rebels. We met people who have seen, in fact, we went in a room in one of the towns where 3 men had been shot dead because they refused to convert to Islam. We met so many people who've suffered horrendously. A man at a funeral whose parents had been burnt alive in the garage when the rebels came in shouting Allah Akbar, threw a bomb.
That was IS or al-Nusra?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
sure.
IS or one of the IS-related groups. It's a complex situation of the armed terrorists. But there are atrocities going on there which are horrendous. And the local Syrian people whether it's the leaders of the communities, the local people, the doctors we met in Aleppo, they all say we want peace, we support the Syrian army because that is the way to bring peace, and we want then the chance to choose our own leader. We do not want a political solution imposed by the West which will in any way outlaw or eject President Assad. We want to decide our own future.
Lady Cox, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Wide-ranging